Nicole Christina Nikki Becoles, previously known as Saltair Sally, born in August 23, 1980, was a young woman from Washington state, who had gone missing in Utah and was later found deceased in Utah. She was identified using stable isotope analysis. Her cause of death was undetermined, but investigators believe she was murdered. Nikki had left Washington in 1997 and moved to Sandy, Utah, to live with her boyfriend, Joel Shodoin, for his work. The two of them had a tumultuous relationship. Before moving to Utah, she gave her phone number and address to her family to stay in touch. Nikki began using drugs not long after moving to Utah. She returned home to Washington, pregnant and addicted to drugs. After a couple of run-ins with law enforcement, she chose to complete a drug treatment program. Nikki's mother, Nancy, said she got clean, and she was like a new person. In July 1998, Nikki's old boyfriend started calling her and asking her to come back to Utah. Despite Nancy begging her not to go due to her pregnancy, she returned and moved into an apartment with him in Midvale, Utah. In October 1998, Nikki gave birth to a baby girl. Nikki's family visited her in Utah for the birth of her daughter. Nikki went back to Washington twice in 1999. She went back once and stayed for around a month. She came back again later but appeared to be addicted to drugs and had been recently arrested twice by police in Utah. Her mother, Nancy, stated that Nikki's last visit was positive, as she talked about how she was excited to be a mother. The last time Nancy saw Nikki was when she took her and her daughter to the airport in October 1999. When Nikki went back to Utah this time, she chose not to give out new contact information to her family. In March of 2000, Nancy learned that Child Protective Services in Utah had been to Nikki's apartment. CPS didn't like the conditions that Nikki's daughter was living in. Nikki last spoke to Nancy over the phone, and Nikki said that the next day there was going to be a hearing to determine what was going to happen to her daughter. Nikki was upset that CPS had taken custody of her 1-year-old daughter. That was the last time anyone heard from Nikki. Nikki and Joel were also being evicted from their apartment. Their daughter was taken away and Joel's parents eventually got custody of the girl. Before CPS became involved, Nikki and Joel had split up. Nikki Becoles was last seen on March 15, 2000, living with Joel in a hotel in South Salt Lake. Joel stated they had an argument and that he left. He claims that was the last time he ever saw her. Nobody claims to have seen her alive after March 15th. Nikki's family lost contact with her, which they attributed to tension regarding her living situation. Before March 15th, Nikki and Joel moved around Utah so much that they lost track of her address and phone number. They thought she just needed time to herself because of all that had happened with her daughter. Even though they were concerned, family members weren't sure how to report her missing as they didn't know where she was residing, and they wanted to try and locate her before calling authorities. Nikki's family reported her missing on March 13, 2000. Police investigated but didn't find any clues to Nikki's whereabouts. Authorities in Utah say the family didn't officially report her missing until 2003, where she was actually listed as missing. Nikki's relatives say they called authorities, first in Washington state, and even hired a private investigator, but they made little headway without knowing her address in Utah or having proof she even vanished. Nikki's remains were found near the Great Salt Lake in Utah on October 8, 2000. Salt Lake City police were called to investigate a body half buried in tall grass on the shore of the Great Salt Lake near the abandoned Saltair Concert Hall, within 100 feet of Interstate 80. Duck hunters had stumbled upon some badly decomposed human remains. All that remained were a skull, 26 bones, and several long strands of hair. Detectives say that it had been there a while, as there was evidence of animal activity. There was little clothing found at the scene. A necklace/choker with 3 strands of small blue/purple beads woven into a rope-type design was found entangled in her long, waist-length hair. There is mixed information on how the remains were found. Some sources say that the remains were just found buried in a shallow grave and that pieces of an extra-large Hanes t-shirt were found close to the bones, But some sources also say that buried in the shallow grave was a large plastic bag containing a white sock, an oversized t-shirt, the choker, bones, a long ponytail, and a human skull. Despite the uncertainty, the remains were likely found in a plastic bag, as investigators claim that the nature of her discovery leads them to believe that it was a homicide. Investigators, as well as the coroner, believed that the woman had been dead for 1 to 2 years before she was found, and that contributed to the difficulty in identifying the remains. The coroner did not realize that salt would cause an unpredictable effect on the decomposition of her body. Salt was a factor in her decomposition due to her remains being found near the Great Salt Lake. Because salt helped her body decompose quicker, the coroner believed that the remains had been there longer than they actually were. She was called Saltair Sally by police. No local missing person reports fit the biological profile of Saltair Sally's remains, and neither the facial reconstruction nor a description of the personal effects yielded any clues to her identity. Eventually, the authorities abandoned their research and the case Saltair Sally was closed. In 2008, the authorities discovered a new identification technique, stable isotope ratio mass spectrometry, SIRMS, and they decided to use it for the Saltair Sally case. SIRMS technology involves analyzing people's hair samples to trace where people live. The ratio of stable isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen atoms in a person's hair is related to the ratio of stable isotopes in his or her local drinking water. That relationship can tell researchers about where a person has traveled, meaning hair acts almost like a film strip of a person's life. A research team recreated a timeline of the final years of Saltair Sally's life. They discovered that Saltair Sally had traveled, especially around the Pacific Northwest area of the United States. Without this information, it's very likely that Nikki's case would still be cold. Nikki eventually becoming identified using stable isotope analysis paved way for stable isotope analysis to play an increasingly important role in resolving medical legal issues over the past decade. Nikki's case was the first case ISO forensics used stable isotope analysis on in order to identify an unidentified victim. In 2011, Nancy came across Saltair Sally's facial reconstruction and was convinced that those remains were her daughter's. She contacted authorities, but police said that the remains were most likely not her missing daughter. They said this because Saltair Sally's height, weight, hair color, and time of death didn't match Nikki's description. The main reason, though, was the time of death. The coroner listed Saltair Sally's date of death prior to the year of Nikki's disappearance, therefore the police dismissed the possible connection. Nikki's family members also noted that all of the facial reconstructions made of Saltair Sally barely resembled Nicole, which only made her identification more difficult than it already was. Saltair Sally also had a congenital defect in her upper vertebra, and it was not known if Nikki did. Despite that, Nancy had been fighting with law enforcement for a long time trying to get them to do a DNA test on her because she strongly believed that Saltair Sally was her daughter. Eventually, authorities compared Saltair Sally's travels in the Pacific Northwest to Nikki's case, and Saltair Sally's isotope analysis showed that Saltair Sally had traveled from Utah to Washington frequently, which fit the circumstances in Nikki's case. Authorities then took DNA samples from her mother, Nancy. In 2012, the results came back as a match, identifying Nikki Buchholz as Saltair Sally. Nancy said that Nikki may have been seeing an older man in Utah, but no one knows for sure. The identity of this older man is unknown, but Nancy was likely not referring to Joel, who was Nikki's ex-boyfriend. Nancy believes that Nikki may have briefly worked at a restaurant near her apartment. Based on the remote location along I-80 where her body was found, police say her death was likely a homicide. Foul play is suspected. The main theory is that she was killed along Interstate 80. The drive from the hotel Nikki was last seen at and the location her remains were found takes about 20 minutes to get to. In 2012, UPD said detectives had reopened the case but had no suspects. Authorities had already questioned her ex-boyfriend, Joel, and he was not considered a suspect in the case. However, there is a possible person of interest as of December 2020. Despite Joel not being considered a suspect in her case, it is worthy to note that Joel Shodoin has been in and out of prison for the past decade. On November 10, 2019, Joel was sentenced to 4 years in prison after pleading guilty to possession of heroin, violating a no-contact order, and residential burglary. Joel pleaded guilty for the dismissal of a separate case in exchange. He was arrested in August of 2019 on a warrant for first-degree burglary. At the time of his arrest, he was on drugs. The bench warrant had been issued a couple of days earlier because Joel failed to appear in court. Joel was found to be in possession of a stolen vehicle and multiple controlled substances, including heroin and methamphetamine. Joel had previously been charged with possession of burglary tools, and he was found to be carrying a weapon capable of bodily harm. Additional charges at the time included bail jumping and obstructing a law enforcement officer. In December 2020, an anonymous tipster notified the Utah Cold Case Coalition of a person of interest in Nikki's murder. Since getting the tip, they were interested in Nikki's case and reached out to the person of interest. For 30 days, the nonprofit organization was willing to help the person of interest get legal representation, a letter of immunity, or even the $15,000 reward to help bring closure to the case if it was an accident. If the person of interest didn't contact them within the 30 days, they turned over the information to UPD. It is unknown if the person of interest ever contacted the organization. Acquaintances of Nikki and Joel, or anyone who knew them between 1999 to 2000, are encouraged to contact the Unified Police Department to aid in the investigation of Nikki's death, which remains unsolved. The body of Rebecca Zahau was found nude, bound and hanging from a balcony at a Coronado mansion in 2011, and her death was classified suicide. Her family formally asked the county to reclassify the manner of death as homicide or undetermined. The change in the manner of death, which was ruled a suicide, would likely prompt a new investigation, according to the family's attorney, who sent a petition to the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office. "We want an honest criminal investigation into Rebecca's case," said Doug Lohner, Zahau's brother-in-law, who stood alongside Greer during a news conference at the attorney's office in Rancho Bernardo. Zahau's body was found July 13, 2011, hanging from a balcony attached to a second-floor guest bedroom at the historic Spreckels Mansion on Ocean Boulevard that was owned at the time by her boyfriend, pharmaceutical executive Jonah Shacknai. Zahau's hands and feet were bound, a t-shirt was stuffed into her mouth, and a cryptic message was scrawled in black paint on the bedroom door. The message read, "She saved him, can you save her?" Zahau died 2 days after Shacknai's 6-year-old son was gravely injured in an accidental fall while in her care. Authorities said they suspected Zahau was distraught over the incident. Shacknai's younger brother, Adam, was staying on the property at the time and found her body. He called 911 and cut her down. In 2018, a civil jury found Adam Shacknai legally responsible for her death. He has never been criminally charged in the case. During the civil trial, Greer argued that Shacknai battered his brother's girlfriend, sexually assaulted her and strangled her, then staged the hanging to look like she took her own life. Shacknai testified that he did not kill Zahau. His attorney said there was no evidence he killed her, and that he was sued simply because he was present on the property when she died. After the civil verdict, the family pressed the sheriff's department to investigate the case as a homicide. After an 8-month review, the sheriff's department determined, again, that there was no evidence Zahau was killed. Greer and the family then turned their attention to the medical examiner's office. The petition sent to the office states that after Zahau's death was ruled a suicide, a large body of evidence and expert analysis came to light and shows that Zahau likely did not kill herself. The petition points to testimony from experts called by Greer. Experts said a lack of DNA and fingerprints suggested the crime scene has been cleaned up, that the knots used to bind and hang Zahau were similar to knots used in Shacknai's line of work as a tugboat captain, and that the writing on the door, 2 letters in particular, were consistent with his handwriting. The petition also cites a January 25, 2019, tentative ruling issued by San Diego Superior Court Judge Catherine Bacall, who denied post-trial motions filed by Shacknai to set aside the 9-3 jury verdict against him and get a new trial. In the ruling, Bacall questioned the sheriff's department's conclusions. She zeroed in on the cryptic message, which she said she believed Zahau likely did not write. And if she did not, someone else did, Bacall wrote in part. As a result, it is not unreasonable to still ask, who killed Rebecca Zahau? Shacknai's attorneys did not respond to requests for comment Thursday. The medical examiner's office said Thursday that it had not received the petition. Chuck Westerhade, a spokesperson, said the office completed a thorough investigation in 2011 and a review in 2018. The review, completed as part of the Sheriff's Department's review, did not result in any changes to the findings. In the review, then Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Glenn Wagner did not look at the details that surfaced in court, writing in a memo in November of that year that no new information, from the civil procedures, was forthcoming from the Zahau lawyers. Westerhade has said the office requires new information and a petition in writing to revisit findings in a case. Greer on Thursday accused the Sheriff's Department of corruption for maintaining that Zahau's death was a suicide. After the review of the case in 2018, the family took the department to court in an effort to obtain records about the investigation, but, according to Greer, the documents the family wanted, records about any instructions for the review, didn't exist. Greer suggested that was suspicious. In a statement, the Sheriff's Department said it maintains the highest quality and standards throughout its work and investigations. At the end of the day, we've exhausted what we can do with the Sheriff's Department, Greer said. Now we're moving our focus onto the medical examiner's office. Greer said that if the office doesn't change the manner of death in Zahau's case, the family will head back to court to request a ruling to amend the finding. I'm hoping the medical examiner's office will do the right thing, Greer said. Zahau's family, specifically Lohner and his wife Mary Zahau Lohner, endorsed John Hemmerling in the race for San Diego County Sheriff. In a statement, the couple said their family suffers every day as a result of the current leadership in the department and that they believe Hemmerling will do his best to seek justice for Zahau. Hemmerling joined Lohner and Greer during the news conference. Afterward, Hemmerling promised to reopen the case if he is elected, regardless of whether the medical examiner's office changes its findings. He said public interest in the case, the jury verdict and Bacall's ruling warrant a fresh look at the case. If you like the video, show your support and subscribe and make sure you click on the bell icon to stay tuned.